And welcome to another video podcast from Lambert Creative Media. I'm Colin Lambert, and we are so grateful that you're taking a few moments to be with us today. Been promoting this for about a week, and that was before the events that took place in Uvalde, Texas. And I think part of the conversation even today was whether we should move forward with this conversation with Dr. John Trent about the blessing. And throughout the morning, I spent time in prayer, had a conversation with Dr. Trent, and I just felt like the blessing could be something that could really tie into this conversation today, even as we start and mourning about what's happened in Uvalde, Texas, with the death of 19 children, 2 teachers, and 17 others injured, first responders and families affected. And our prayers, our hearts go out to them today. I'm glad today to have with us a gentleman who's been around counseling, marriage and family counseling for years and years. He's an award-winning author, a speaker, and founder and president of Strong Families. Dr. John Trent, thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. It's great to have you here on the program.
Well, thank you. It's a great honor and blessing to be here. Thanks, Colin.
Well, what a heavy heart we both come. We were just talking about this before we began. What a heavy heart we both come to this conversation with today. And before we get to the conversation about the blessing, which I do think is important and I believe has even a tie-in to some of this, of what's been going on, what we've been hearing about over the last 24 hours, we're all trying to process this. We're all trying to process this incredible grief and sorrow, and none more than those closely related to the events in Uvalde. I mentioned on social media yesterday, my grandparents lived most of their lives in Uvalde. Both are buried on the south side of town. My mother went to elementary school, middle school, high school, and Uvalde was there till she got married. And I spent many summers walking the streets of Uvalde. So that holds a special place in my heart, a tight-knit community, and everybody knows everybody. What pain and suffering going on there. But before we get to the blessing, Dr. Trent, just maybe some thoughts about how we process what we're hearing and experiencing as a community.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, for some of us that, I live in Arizona. Um, I, it is so heartbreaking to once again be struggling to comprehend something like this. And there's Sandy Hook, there's Colorado. It just, it joins the list of really horrendous and terrible things that, and during that time, it's so easy to, use events as, leverage points. And boy, that's the last thing we wanted to do is you and I, as we talked, it's like, well, should we even should we even talk about things like the blessing? Should we just spend the whole time and just, talk about grief and loss and, that kind of a thing? But Colin, we're also coming out of, I mean, there's a million Americans that have lost their lives. We have lost several friends, no family members, with COVID. And I think we've just been surrounded by so much loss and death. And then all of a sudden this happens and it's like, well, is this just is this just something else, just adds on to, we kind of have this compassion, overload that's just, we're hurting so much in so many ways. So in no way do we want to add to that. But I do think, we talked about it and prayed about it and thought about, well, okay, I wish we could go down there and just not say a word and just hug people and try to be there for them. But I do think we can talk today just about, not just grief, but is there anything we can do to make sure that kids, get that blessing in this crazy world where we live in?
Yeah. It was amazing because I did think about, as we were processing whether or not to even do the program today, my thought went to this boy. He was a boy, 18-year-old boy who carried
Yeah.
out this horrific act. And it's obvious already from what we're hearing that he is a boy that, and it doesn't excuse anything related to his actions, but he
Right.
was a boy that was rejected by peers, possibly rejected by family, continually bullied in some ways. Um, we are looking at our own kids saying, are we raising them well? Are we pouring into them what they need? Are we being the kind of leaders and parents and mentors that we should be for these young people? That to me kind of leads in some ways into what the blessing is all about. It's really about that unconditional love and acceptance from a parent to their child. And if you think about how many lives could be changed ultimately because of that engagement between parent and child, it just seems to me innumerable. So as we begin this conversation, still remembering and thinking about those whose lives have been affected, take just a moment to tell us about what is the blessing. When did you come to begin thinking about the blessing and decided this is something we really need to talk about?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question to kind of transition this. The blessing really came about for me when I was working in a psychiatric hospital in Dallas, and I was in my doctoral program, and it was my first day in the job. And Colin, do you have any first day in the job stories that are pretty good? And mine was, I ended up sitting next to this young man, and for almost 4 hours we sat in a break room and just talked. And he was there, and now he hadn't tried to hurt somebody else, but he had tried to take his own life. And what it was is we began to talk as he came from a home with an incredible perfectionist dad, and he had just got his first B as in boy, not D as in dog, and could not go home. No, and it was a non-major PE course. He just sucked at. He wasn't a good athlete. He was a brilliant kid, but he gets a B in tennis, and it's going to ruin his 4.0, and he literally tries to take his life. And here's what I'm getting at. I went home that night and I read Genesis chapter 27, because the next day I was doing a study at our church on these two twins. And I've always loved that story because I'm a twin, and my mom always liked Jeff best. But there were, these two boys, and one of them gets the blessing and one of them doesn't. We've all heard that story, right? Jacob and Esau, and there's Isaac, the dad, and, he blesses one, he doesn't bless the other. But without going even into even any details, Colin, listen to this. It says in Genesis chapter 27 that when Esau heard the words of his father, that he would, in other words, that he would never get the blessing, he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry and said, "Bless me, even me also, O my father." And he lifts up his voice and wept. And there is this deep need, this deep pain that comes when, you mentioned with this guy in Uvalde, there's so much, as you're hearing, so much hurt, so much rejection. And what happens is a lot of times people internalize it, like this young man I met with, or sometimes they'll, turn it outwards as well. And so as we begin to talk about the blessing, it really centers around that deep need we have in our life for acceptance, for somebody to say, hey, that they love us, that they're crazy about us. And we just need that desperately. And that's really where I first kind of got the idea that, man, this blessing has something to do with that whole area.
So talk for a moment. Obviously, in biblical times, the blessing was kind of part of the culture. I don't know in America that there's ever been really much conversation other than your book and conferences related to this
Mhm.
about bestowing a blessing on your children. Talk for a moment maybe about that cultural element in Israel, biblical times, and maybe how that might apply to where we are in modern day America.
Oh no, absolutely. Really, it starts with the blessing. Really, kind of began as you begin to research it. Deuteronomy 30:19. Almighty God gets the nation of Israel together, and he lines them up. They're just ready to go into the promised land, and he says, "Behold, I set before you a choice, life or death, the blessing or the curse. So choose life, you and your descendants. And so it began, the blessing really was a sense that, okay, you have a choice. Life in Hebrew literally means movement. Okay, so choose life. Now, when we choose life in Christ today, He gets us moving, even towards people that are hard to bless, for example. But it's blessed. The word life is movement. The word death means to step away. So that's the first choice, life or death. Man, we right now we have the ability to choose life in Christ. He is the life. And so for in biblical times, man, there was though that first choice, choose life in God. But then there, well, how do you live it out? Well, it's blessing over curse. And the word blessing, Colin, literally means to bow the knee. Here's somebody that's so valuable, like picture meeting Queen Elizabeth, or somebody that's royalty. And we don't get that in our American culture, but you see all these people and, they curtsy or they bow to the king or the queen. And we're not saying do that with your kids. They're going to think you're really weird if you do that, right? Come home today from school, their last day of school, some of them, and they're going to go, okay, well, bow before your kid. Now, what it's saying is attitudinally, here's somebody that really thinks I'm special, that's crazy about me. And kids pick that up. It's very interesting, just even with our eyes. It says, bright eyes makes the heart glad. And have you ever been to a party or somewhere and calling somebody, you don't know very many people, and there's that one person that sees you and their eyes just light up. They haven't even said a word. And it's like, oh, there's so-and-so, and they think I'm really cool. And so that's the blessing, is you're attaching high value, but you don't have to do that. You can curse. And the word curse means to dam up the stream, literally in Hebrew. And it's a picture of subtracting water. Okay, so the ark comes to rest, Mount Arad, and then it says, and the waters abated. Well, literally, they pulled back. So when you pull back these life-giving waters, that's literally what the word curse means. And so think of the woman at the well real quick. She's 5 times she's had a husband, choose, to step not towards her, but to step away, to not to add, but to subtract, and step out of her life. My dad left when I was 2 months old, and never met him until I was in high school. So there's a lot of us that have had people that have stepped away from us. But what the blessing is it's saying, hey, I see you. I'm not only do I see you, but I'm committed to you. There's 5 things you did when you bless someone. And it's just so important, I think, to realize that, man, the Lord himself ties in life and death with blessing and curse. It's that significant. And then later on, it got then translated into families, where we could take God's love. So, we want God's blessing, because once we get God's love and blessing, we can bless people, even people we never thought about blessing. So that's really kind of the real quick, biblical theology of blessing for you.
That's awesome. And you mentioned there's kind of 5 elements to the blessing. Could we
Yeah.
kind of step through those and
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about each one?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting, but every time a blessing was given, there was appropriate, meaningful touch. So that was the first one. Now, Colin, there's an amazing study out of University of Virginia, and it was replicated at Plymouth University in England. And picture this: you're on campus, and somebody stops you, and they go, "Hey, we're doing a psychological study. Who doesn't want to miss?" Class to be in a study, right? If you're a college kid. So what they would do is they would pick some people by themselves, and then they would pick some people that were with somebody, and then they would check and say, now, how well do you know this person? So what they would do is let's say they were dating, or they were really close friends, roommates, something like that. So they would take the people that were by themselves, and on the Virginia campus, campus, there's a really high hill, right? So they'd put a 45-pound, not a Ranger pack is about 65 pounds, but they put a 45-pound backpack on somebody, and it was a visual perception study. How high is the hill, right? And how much work is it going to take to get up there? Everybody by themselves, when they looked at the hill and they're wearing this big backpack and they've got to go up the hill, overestimated how high it was and how hard it would be to climb. But now they would take the two people that were friends, right? Or, dating, whatever. But they'd harness up one person and they had all the electrodes on and they say, now, wait a minute, you don't have to climb this alone. And they put a backpack on the other person and they would just put their hand on that person's shoulder. And every one of them, the hill shrank. And see where the blessing begins to say, man, you're going up that high hill. I'm going with you. Now that starts with my touch. And then the second one is it's with my words. I'm going to tell you, hey, I'm going up that hill with you. And then the third element, so you say it. Well, what do you say? Well, words that attach high value, words that attach high value. And Colin, you have kids, right? Hey, Colin, are you still there?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So pick the oldest kid. Okay. What's one character trait that you just think God placed in that oldest kid? Now, all of them are awesome. And if we had time, we'd pick all of them, but just what's something God's placed, a character trait God's placed in that kid?
Confidence.
Yeah. Okay. And boy, for you to say that, for you to put your hand on their shoulder, to say verbally. Now, you know what? I am so grateful for you. And one of the things God has given you that I see is just this confidence to do life. I mean, there can be challenges and everybody else can be running around with their hair on fire, but God has given you this confidence. And I know, and here's the fourth one. So with your touch, with your words, you want to attach high value to someone, help them see they have value. Because there's so many kids today that grow up and man, they feel they have no value or no, they just have no strengths, no gifts, where you're going to tell them what you see that's so important. And then that helps them get a sense of a special future. And Colin, today, there's so many high school kids that think, well, man, with climate change, the world's ending anyway. I mean, there's, 49% of a recent study of 10,000 kids said 49% of the kids said, well, why bother? There is no future. There's no more world. And yet what the Lord says is, hey, I give you a future and a hope. And they're going to realize someday that, man, that's a choice. But with culture and with life around them, people are saying, you don't have a future. God says, boy, you have a future and a hope. And when you tell that to them, so I wouldn't be surprised if God used that confidence that he's put in your life. You could do all these things and you tell them some of the things that they could do and a light begins to go off in their life and heart. And then the last thing is say, so, I just want you to know now this is today, it's March, it's whatever the date is that today, let's say it's May 25th. And so you put your hand on that kid's shoulder or you call them and you say, now look, or you send them a video. That's what we do with something called the Blessing Day, where we get parents to do a blessing, just like I'm talking about. They need to hear it. They need to hear it today. We don't know if they'll, what's going to happen, tomorrow, but man, they need to know it today. So anyway, long story short is, you call them and then with your touch, even if you're saying, hey, just picture my hands on your shoulder. And now I want you to know with my words that you have my blessing. And not only that, God has given you some great gifts. And I believe, it's something that God can use for your future. And I want you to know I'm not going anywhere. Now, someday I'll go home to be with the Lord and I'll be waiting for you. But the Lord will never leave you nor forsake you. And you have his blessing as well. So that's what we coach people to do, Colin, it's super simple, but I'm telling you, it can be nothing short of life-changing for a kid of any age.
Talk for a moment, if you will, and I know you've been doing this for years, but I'm sure you hear stories from people who have taken these steps to pass this blessing along to their kids. Have you had an experience personally with this, or do you have a story maybe that comes to top of mind of somebody who's actually done this?
Yeah, we just you used to get letters, now it's all emails. And so we got a email and a picture from a young lady, and this was back when COVID was just raging, and she just decided she had read the book The Blessing. You threw it up there on the screen, and Gary Smalley and I, and now our oldest daughter Carrie has jumped in with me, and she had read the book The Blessing. And so here's the daughter, Colin, and she just goes, you know what, I need to bless my dad. And because he's in a nursing home, well, she got permission to meet with him, except she sends a picture. And so gosh, I wish I could have sent you the picture, to be so cool to show. But the bottom line is, picture, there was like a grass area there at the nursing home, and they had one chair about 10 feet away from another chair, and they could sit. That's how close they could sit. They could get about 10 feet from each other in the chair. And she's got in her hand a piece of paper, and she's reading him a blessing. Thank you, Dad, for, I wish I could come over there and give you a hug, but, all this. And I want you to know how much I thank you, love you. And here's why. And I think why God is, and well, he's got to do it. He ends up spontaneously. He had never said verbally, I love you, to her. And he takes that opportunity and gives her a blessing, tells her he loves her, tells her all this stuff about it. And they're both, she said, we're 10 feet away, just, weeping. And I think, the only thing that could have made that better, and if the nurses weren't there, they probably would have ran and hugged each other. But she sends the picture of them sitting in that chair. And I think that's the kind of thing we're trying to say to people is, take that opportunity. Take that opportunity to tell that person. We do a lot with military families, and we give them these really cool coins that have you ever heard of coining in the military? Yeah. It's like a challenge, and say, all right, you gotta, before you take off, before you're deployed, you sit down with each one of those kids and give them one of these coins and give them your blessing. So that's what we're challenging people all over the country to do. And it's so much fun to get to talk to you about it, even on a really tough day like this.
Yeah, I was thinking, I guess all along I've kind of thought of the blessing being from parent to child, but your illustration you just gave of this young lady, though it did come back to her, it started with her to the parents. So this is really something you could do with anybody.
Yeah, and you really, Deuteronomy 23:5 is a fantastic verse. It says, now the Lord your God was not willing for Balaam. Now, Balaam is a really bad guy that wanted to curse God's people, for the curse that, to rest upon you. Remember, curse means subtract. So God wasn't willing for there to be subtraction, but the Lord your God turned the curse into a blessing for you because the Lord your God loves you. Wow. So it is God's love that reverses the curse, and that can allow us to even give the blessing somebody, in this case, that had never given it to us, and that reversed the curse so many people don't bless others because they don't know how. And then they realize it, and they realize, oh my gosh, that was my third grade teacher. She gave me a blessing. That was my first boss at the job, at the radio station I was at. And that person said, gosh, you're good at this. And it set my whole future off. Do you see what I'm getting at? So I think we know it. Attachment theory today is exploding with how important this is, but the Bible got there first. And I think it's called the blessing.
Yeah. Doc, one of the things I know you talk about a lot, and it's important, is I even think again of this incident yesterday in Uvalde, when people are separated for whatever reasons. It could be death, it could be moves, it could be many things that separate them, and that blessing has not happened.
Yeah.
Is there a way to engage with the blessing after maybe a parent is gone? Is there a way to kind of redeem what maybe was missed in life?
Well, I think for some of us, like I never got the blessing from my dad. God bless him. He was an old 3rd Marine Division guy, and, came back from World War II hating God and man, and got one look at us. I mean, twins. So as my older brother was 2, and then here's Jeff and I come along, and he stayed for 2 months, and I never met him again until I was in college. And but I thank God that there was a young life leader that stepped into my life, and that really gave me the blessing. And then a coach. I wrestled in high school and college, and there was a coach, and so we can be that person of blessing to someone else if they grew up without it. Sometimes it's our spouse, and we're the one that gets to bless them when they never got it. So it's important to close the loop if we can. You know what I mean? But sometimes we just can't. Colin, do you know what the word forgiveness is in the New Testament? I was a Greek major because of Dallas Seminary, because I got some bad advice, and majored in Greek. But it literally means to untie the knot. The word luo, to untie the knot. And I was so tied up in knots, I just hated my dad. And then I became a Christian after, when he'd bailed out. Then I became a Christian, and I met him, and I had to untie the knot. It was, I was becoming just like him, and I didn't even know him. And so there's that sense of when you really forgive someone and let God's love pour into your life. Now, you don't lean into left hooks. My dad was an alcoholic. He never drove. When I did meet him and he came over, I mean, our kids never drove in the same car with him because he was an active alcoholic. And so we're not saying get rid of boundaries. There's no, there was all, there's that still scars and tough things and all that stuff, but you can't out hate people. And when we untie the knot and we let God's blessing flow through us, then man, it's amazing what can happen to people to reverse the curse.
Yeah. You mentioned a while back the blessing day or the blessing challenge. I know
Yeah.
that you've got one coming up a little later this year. Talk a little bit about what that looks like and how people can learn more about that.
Man, we are just getting ready. We're getting a bunch of endorsements, and we thank you for you being one person that'll be adding your voice to it, and people that are going to be jumping in with us. And we're going to be asking churches, just set aside a day. No, it doesn't have to be Father's Day. It doesn't have to be Mother's Day. It could be any day. It could be a night. I don't care. But it's where we teach people. They can watch a video or they can teach it themselves. That's fine. But here's what the blessing is. And then we get them to, guess what we get them to do, Colin? Everybody has one of these now, almost. And they're gonna understand what the blessing is. Then we coach them through how do you do it, and then they take their video on their phone and they tape a blessing right there for that kid, and then send it, or grandkid, or their roommate, or who in their life really needs the blessing. And so the blessing day is really a challenge to say, hey, let's start making this. Hey, you've got a birthday. I wish we had bar mitzvahs and stuff. And you mentioned we don't really have a Christian culture of blessing, but this will be a fun thing, I think, to just ask people to consider, hey, take a blessing day, take a time to give someone you love a blessing.
Is there a date set, or is it a period of time?
It'll be starting in September, so people will start hearing about it. And but you're really the first ones to first place in the country right here on Colin's program to talk about it. So we'll come back maybe in September or something and can talk more about it.
That's great. We would love to do that, and so excited to see how this through the years has impacted people. I have one kind of final question related to the blessing. You mentioned that in recent years, your daughter's name has been added to this book, and I know that she's been involved with you in this process. Just talk for a moment about that opportunity. You have just described how you were not attached to your dad, and how now you're able to even share this with your daughter. Talk for a moment about that.
Well, let me tell you, Carrie is 10 times as good a speaker and everything else that I am, but that's not where she was. See, here's the deal. This isn't a formula. We're not saying do these 5 things, you'll be a perfect parent, your kid will be fine. Carrie walked away from us, from the Lord, when she was right at the end of college. She got involved with this guy. It was an abusive, horrible thing. It's a big part of her story that she talks about now, but we lost her for 5 years, lost her. But it was really and truly, believe it or not, it was the blessing that brought her back home. Because when she finally woke up, and what abuse does is it just erases so much. If the blessing was there, abuse just erases it, and you're told so many bad things about yourself. But I had given her a list of 10 things that I had seen in her life, and she kept that list. That was something she found and kept, and she'd go in the closet and things were really bad, and she'd read that. And when she finally came home, and now she works with us at Strong Families, is just God's grace. So it's, again, the blessing isn't a formula, but it is so powerful. And I remember I told Carrie, she goes, Dad, when all the stuff came out, all the horrible stuff, and I go, put my hand on her shoulder, and you go, it's not where you've been, it's where you're going. And I don't even remember saying that. It was earth shaking for her. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So we're not talking about perfection. We're just talking about, take that opportunity as an imperfect parent to bless an imperfect kid. But man, when we give them God's blessing, it can be restorative in so many ways.
Yeah. Final question today, and there's just so much material here, so much good stuff. And again, even as we prayed about doing the program today, in the shadow of the Uvalde massacre,
Yeah.
I was just reminded again about the power of something like this blessing to a child, or between a child and a parent, that could potentially stop something like this from happening. A child who's maybe heading down a wrong path might have their life turned around simply because a parent has an opportunity to engage with that child. Just in the moment we have left here, as we're processing this as parents, thinking about training up our children in the way they should go, maybe a thought for a parent watching today, whenever this may be, either live or when they
Yeah.
come back to it at some point,
Yeah.
who doesn't feel like they've maybe lived up to what they should be doing. Maybe a first step or two to getting back to being that lover of their children that they really need to be, and that those children need from them.
Yeah. Well, for so many of us, particularly if we never saw the blessing, it's hard to give something you've never seen. But I think as they've heard about it, and maybe they can rewatch this program, and maybe get the book The Blessing, spend some time looking at it. But I am telling you, just that short video, just that decision they make to step towards, not away, to add, not to subtract, can be something that can be met with skepticism. I mean, again, kids, you have to rebuild trust and everything else. We're not saying that, but this is a great starting point. These 5 elements of the blessing to building attachment that really can change a kid's life.
Yeah. Well, what a great time to speak with you today, Dr. Trent. I appreciate you so much. I had the joy of working with you over a period of time at
Yeah.
the Moody Bible Institute when you were there, and just appreciate your friendship, your input into my life, and obviously the work that you've done through the blessing. And I pray, even through what's taken place here today, that some folks' lives will be changed for eternity because of focusing on giving that blessing and how important that is. I'm grateful for you, my friend, and
Well,
and
thank
I
you.
will continue to point people to strongfamilies.com, because it's a great place to learn more about helping your kids and building your family.
Great. Hey, thanks. And Lord bless you too, friend. Great to get to be with you.
Lord bless you. Dr. John Trent. And let me remind you quickly, here's a few of those resources. Dr. Trent's book, The Blessing, and it's available now in its latest edition. I think it's something that's valuable for you to get a hold of. The website, Strong Families has a website. This is the area that talks about the blessing, if you're interested in following up on that. And finally, I'm going to put up on the screen for a moment the QR code. You can actually scan this code if you're watching right now. It'll take you straight to that page, to the blessing. You can scan this, and you can start working on your own blessing right now, because we want to be ready for the blessing challenge, blessing days coming up in September. Hope to learn more about that as well. Maybe we'll have Dr. Trent back at that time. So grateful for you being here today. Thank you so much for being a part of this broadcast today. I really can't say anything other than as you close out this time with me, you may be watching it live, you may be watching later, and just remember to pray for those folks in the Uvalde area. If you're watching today sometime, it's current, but if it's days or weeks or months from now, those folks are still going to need your prayers because they're still going to be dealing with an incredible loss in their lives. And so I just want to encourage you to be praying for those families, for those first responders. Some already had to be taken off the job because of what they saw there. An incredibly challenging time today. Maybe, just maybe something like the blessing could be something that changes a child's direction, that they would head a different direction than maybe the path they're on. Regardless, I think from what you heard from Dr. Trent, all of us can benefit from those personal touches, from those words of encouragement, the direction given, the blessing given. I think we can all benefit from that, and I think we could do that parent to child, child to parent, relatives, spouses. He even mentioned that, grandparents. So many opportunities. I pray that you'll take advantage of that. And again, thank you for taking a few minutes to join us today. This is a video podcast brought to you on a fairly regular basis as we engage on topics of the day and things that I feel like might be of interest to you. It's brought to you by my company, Lambert Creative Media. I'm Colin Lambert. Thanks so much for your time today. It's been a blessing to be with you. God bless you. We'll see you next time.